of the way. We are going to do notes, though, over the colonies moving on from just being English settlements to having their own government, their own way of life, and really getting very close to the moment where they are about to become, starting to feel a little bit of independence. This is Unit 2, Part 1, which means that anything from Unit 1 you no longer need. I do not give you a unit test, or I do not give you a semester test. This is the beginning of a new unit. So let's go ahead and get started. I will go ahead and try to make myself disappear. Magic. All right, here we go. All right, the first thing we need to know is we're going to divide these up into 3 different types of colonies. We already kind of talked about the New England colonies when we talked about the Puritans, Massachusetts Bay. We talked about the Middle colonies when we were talking about the Quakers, and we talked about the Southern colonies when we talked about Jamestown and tobacco. Keep those same distinctions in mind. They are each going to be a little bit different in what they produce. In New England, it's going to be more focused on the fact that they are surrounded by forests, and so there'll be more ships, more fishing, more lumber. In the Middle colonies, trade is going to be the big one. So you're going to see fur, glass. You're going to see a lot of income come in from interaction with England. The Southern colonies are going to be very agriculture and very much plantations. And this is not only going to impact the Southern colonies economically when they raise tobacco, wheat, and indigo, but it's also going to impact how their cities develop, or the fact that in the South there won't be very many cities, at least not until the Civil War. All right, this is a very important term, a term that's so important that I had to make myself magically reappear for a moment. Hello? Mercantilism. This economic theory is very critical to understanding why the British act the way they do and why people are so focused on having colonies. Mercantilism is this idea that you need to produce everything you need to exist as a country, meaning that if we are going to have food, if we're going to have rubber, if we're going to have wood for ships, all of that needs to be made by us so that we do not have to rely on other countries. This is absolutely critical. This is the mindset that Britain and other European countries have at this time. Now that I've said that, I'm going to go ahead and vanish again. So, mercantilism is this idea that each country should be self-sufficient. So what this means is countries compete against each other for their overall wealth. And it encourages colonialism because here's the thing. If you can't make some sort of product in your home country, what you do is you go and you create colonies. And those colonies can then be like the place where you go and you get the tobacco, or you get the gold and silver, or you get the food that you can't make in your home country, and you bring it back to the mother country. It strongly discourages trade with other countries, because trade with other countries is only beneficial if you're gaining more than you're losing. And so this economic theory, this idea that we need to be self-sufficient and we shouldn't rely on other people, is going to cause a lot of wars, it's going to cause the creation of a lot of colonies, and it's going to be the main mindset that Great Britain is going to have as it interacts with its colonies and as it interacts with other countries in the world. You don't need to write this stuff down, but this is a good time for Mr. Martin to put in his 2 cents. So I don't often try to give my opinions, but this is a good point to talk about where this relates to the future. Mercantilism is a terrible idea, and here's why. If someone threatens your supplies, you get your troops ready and you start going to war. So mercantilism often leads to unnecessary wars. And mercantilism focuses too much on this thing that we call a trade imbalance. A trade imbalance means that when you take in or you import more than you export, because under the theory of mercantilism, you're losing money and you're losing gold. This is not how the world works today. Today, we operate under the idea of free trade, the idea that you don't worry about producing all of your own goods. You focus on who can make the most goods most efficiently. So in the United States, we are stinking good at producing food, whether it's wheat, corn, beef, pork, we are good at it. and we can produce it at a much cheaper cost than many other countries in the world. When it comes to electronics, the Japanese are fantastic at it. So we trade freely. We don't put in any tariffs. We don't put in, excuse me, we don't put in any extra weird quotas. We just trade freely. And you know what this means? Everybody gets to pay less for more things. Overall, we do better. This means, by the way, that tariffs are a bad idea. Thank you for hearing my little commentary. Back to the notes. Anyway, as the colony's role was to export a large amount of raw materials to England. This could be lumber, fish, fur, tobacco, anything that was just the bare goods themselves. And then what they would do is they would send those goods to England. With England's factories and with their craftsmen, they would return finished products, like maybe they would have chairs, or maybe they would have clothes, or stuff like that. And they would sell those then to the rest of the world, or they would sell them back to the colonies. What started happening was that the individual colonies were not just giving all their raw materials to England. Instead, they were selling them to traders from other countries, like specifically the Dutch. They sent some off to the French. And the reason they were doing this is because it was quicker. These people had colonies that were a lot closer than sending it all the way across the Atlantic Ocean back to Mother England. This, in turn, made Mother England quite angry because she saw this as a threat to her trade balance. Because remember, in mercantilism, they're worried about making sure you have all the supplies you need to be self-sufficient. Trade is not a good thing in the mind of someone who is mercantilist. This leads to the English Parliament passing something called the Navigation Acts. And it's a series of laws that restricted colonial trade, and it said you cannot trade with foreign nations, and all goods that were bought in England had to be bought from ships, or excuse me, all goods that were bought in the colonies had to be bought from ships that had been to English ports. And if not, those things had to have an extra tariff on them. And let's just say the colonies did not take this well. Everything became massively more expensive for them. They were unable to make a lot of money from trading with their neighbors. And so this will kind of be the first time we will see tension between the American colonies and their English overlords. And some colonies kind of felt like, well, why do we even have to do these laws? We're only kind of part of England, and they never consulted us anyway. And so they just kind of ignored the laws. And England was none too happy about this. Massachusetts, for one, had its charter revoked and was put under the direct control of the Crown, meaning that the King of England at the time directly took control of that colony. The northern colonies were all consolidated under this thing called the Dominion of New England, which was kind of ruled under a somewhat dictatorship because the governor who the king appointed was a jerk to the colonists. As a result, the colonists then kind of had some small revolts in 1689 where they tried to overthrow the governor and actually succeeded. There were revolts in New York, there were revolts in Boston, there were revolts in Maryland. It was all sorts of frustration on the parts of colonists about the fact that the English government was cracking down on this. So the English government realized that this was not a good idea. Fortunately for the colonists, what happened was there was something called the Glorious Revolution. The Glorious Revolution is an immensely complicated and convoluted thing about basically a new king replacing an old king. And if this were English history, we would be able to go into full detail about all of it. But this is American history, and so we're not going to talk about it. And besides, trying to explain how the monarchy works in Great Britain is dull, so we're not going to talk about it. All you need to know is basically at the same time as the colonists are kind of having this jerk be the governor, at least in the northeastern colonies, back in England there's kind of a change in his charge, and as a result there's a new king on the throne who's a little bit more willing to let the colonies do what they want. And so the king, in coordination with his parliament, will reinstate the Massachusetts charter, let them kind of rule themselves again, and things kind of go back to the way they were. They institute this new policy, and it's called benign, or sometimes it's also called salutary. It means the exact same thing. It's called benign neglect. And what it means is it's a policy where the government agrees to take a hands-off approach to the colonies, as long as the products keep coming to England. So basically the colonies promise that they will stop trading with other countries. They'll start bringing all their unfinished products to England. And in return, England promises that it will stop interfering in the ways of the colonies. They can start being a little bit independent. This is a critical moment in the history of the colonies. This creates a new, well, it kind of creates a new precedent, a new example. From here on out, the colonies are basically acting almost as if they're their own independent country. Yes, they still have to provide some goods to England, but England is saying, we will basically let you rule yourselves as long as you keep providing us with all the goods. This was not Parliament and England's original intent, and originally they had intended to create more strict laws, but in all reality, the colonies were left to govern themselves. I like to, if you're having a hard time understanding this whole benign neglect thing, it's basically like absent parenting, where you as the parent are basically like, okay, my child, I'm going to be over here sitting doing my thing. Just don't get yourself in trouble now. And like when your child goes and does whatever they want, you do absolutely nothing about it. This is benign neglect. Pretending you're the parent, but not doing any of the actual parenting. All right, I want you to review in class before you move on. So what is mercantilism? And what is benign neglect? All right, your funnies for today. You all know this happens to you. And you all know I grade more strictly than you do. I love it. This guy was obviously having a great morning. And finally, for all you pop drinkers out there, all right, that is it. You should be watching CNN 10 after this. I'll be back tomorrow, but until then, have a good rest of your day.